Friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. Bruce was everything she wanted from a man with his barrel chest and strong jaw, running his construction company like a king. No one contacted Bruce Chambers. Even almost 20 years later, Margot was proud to bear his name. He was a fantastic lover, a wonderful father to their 2 children, a patient man with her son from her first marriage, who had been living separately with his father in recent years. Although the frequency of their lives has decreased somewhat over the years, its quality has not changed. Bruce was as assertive, passionate, and fearless as he was when they first met, and Margot loved being his wife. So when Margot answered the phone one afternoon and heard a woman crying on the phone, her first reaction was bewilderment. There was no way this could be Carol, the office manager of Bruce's company, the most serious and reserved woman Margot had ever known. And what she said between sobs was also impossible. Bruce was a fit man of 55. He worked out in their basement gym and went for a run almost every night. Such a person does not faint just like that. Even if he did, he would be in an ambulance somewhere. He would be rushed to the hospital, where he would fight for his life and win. We're talking about Bruce Chambers. He has never lost a single fight in his life. But when the phone was handed over and Margot heard the gloomy, calm voice of Bruce's business partner, Ray, everything became a reality. Bruce collapsed in his office and died before the ambulance arrived there. Heart failure, they said. If Margot wants to see her husband, she needs to go to the hospital morgue. Margot ended the conversation, knelt down and howled in pain like a mother bear in a trap. Everyone was so kind. Her family, her friends, everyone Bruce worked with, they all showed more love and support than Margot could have hoped for. Even her first husband, Jim, called her to express his condolences. They had a pleasant half-hour conversation, during which he promised to talk to Lucas. Their son was 23 years old, and he hadn't spoken to Margot in 5 years. Perhaps this could be the first step towards reconciliation. Bruce's parents were alive, and he had a sister. Of course, they were all devastated, but the funeral expenses were shared with Margot. The service was held in a huge church, and it was attended by many people. Bruce was popular, was one of the pillars of society. When Margot sat in the front row and watched 17-year-old Jerry and 14-year-old Tom stand up and give eulogies in honor of their father, she was proud of them. Both Jim and Lucas appeared, dressed in dark, neat clothes, and not in strict black suits and ties, like most men. The father and son intended to sit in the very back row of the church, but Margot's parents would not hear of it. Margot felt a pang of jealousy as Lucas hugged his grandparents. She fell on her late husband's coffin, and she wanted Bruce's strong arms to hug her. The whole mess with Lucas had never seemed so terrible when a big, strong man was holding her against his big, strong chest. After the funeral, people approached the next of kin to express their condolences. Margot tried to focus on the people who were approaching her, but her heart was pounding. Jim and Lucas joined the line of sympathizers, and in less than a minute, she was actually looking into the eyes of her eldest child. A child? Margot was 24 when she gave birth to Lucas, only a year older than he is now. She could hear his voice when he was talking to his stepbrother and sister. And here he is, a young man in a neat, dark shirt and jacket, looking at a 47-year-old woman whom he used to call Mom. She could still see the fury in his eyes, but he was clearly determined to respect the situation. Margot was very proud of him, but she was smart enough not to say it out loud. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm so glad to see you." She was sincere. Indeed, it was so obvious that she meant it that both sides were a little puzzled. Lucas swallowed and looked at the brooch holding her neckerchief in place. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. He nodded dryly and walked away. Margot turned her head and watched him walk across the grass between the tombstones. Jim came over and stood next to her, following her gaze. Margot cleared her throat. "Maybe we can chat later?" "What is it?" she asked. "Of course," Jim said. But when the meeting moved to the wake at Margot and Bruce's luxurious home, Jim and Lucas were no longer in sight. For the tombstone, Margot chose a classic vertical rectangle of polished granite, durable and uncomplicated. It seemed right for Bruce. Along with his name and dates, an inscription was carved on it. a fearless husband and a loving father. He would have liked that. Margot visited the grave almost every day. Her feeling of emptiness was almost constantly felt in her chest, so the motionless stone block was a comfort. It reminded her of the need to be fearless herself. She has 2 children approaching adulthood, and they needed her to be strong. Her friends had told her she was an attractive woman, but Margot couldn't even think of anyone else right now. Bruce took out a life insurance policy. It's typical for him to think about such things, and she also inherited his share in the construction company. However, Margot wasn't ready to think about it, so she focused on being careful with the money she had. One late October afternoon, about 6 months later, Margot was walking through the churchyard during her daily visit when something made her stop dead in the path. There was a woman on Bruce's grave, squatting in front of the tombstone like someone might squat in front of a toddler. Margot could only see her from behind, but her long black, slightly curly hair and stylish clothes immediately created a sense of feminine attractiveness. The woman was leaning her hand on a granite stone, and Margot wanted to shout at her to stop touching it. The woman straightened up. She was small, but she stood tall, black-heeled boots peeking out from under the hem of a long honey-brown coat. She kissed her fingers and transferred the kiss to the top of the tombstone. After waiting a moment, she turned to leave. Margot felt her throat tighten. She guessed that this woman was attractive, but she was not prepared for how beautiful the young woman's face was. She had dark eyes and eyelashes, slightly rough eyebrows, and there was a liveliness in her expression, as if she found the world wonderful and attractive. The woman was heading for the churchyard gate, which meant she had to pass by Margot. Their eyes met for a moment, and the black-haired woman nodded politely to Margot, preparing to walk around her. Margot glared back. "Who are you? What is it?" she asked. The woman stopped dead in her tracks. "I beg your pardon?" I asked. "Who are you?" "It's none of your damn business who I am. My husband's grave is over there, so I think it's my business." The woman blinked. Then her face broke into a wide, surprised smile. "Oh my God, you're Margot." Margot stepped back as if the woman had hit her. The woman cursed and shook her head. Then the smile returned, a little shy, and she looked at Margot with a kind of warmth, as if they were comrades deceived by the same scammer. Margot didn't smile back. "I asked you a question." "Yes, I see," the woman said. "And if you're Margot, I'll be happy to answer it. But before I do that, I have a question for you." The young woman straightened up and looked into Margot's eyes. "Do you really want to know who I am?" Margot suddenly felt a bad feeling. The cold feeling that had just passed through her stomach told her that she would not like what this woman would say. What's worse is that the warning was probably sincere. Margot knew from experience how difficult it is to dismiss painful things if the person telling you is not motivated by malicious intent. But if this woman left without telling her anything, Margot would always wonder who she was. Or rather, who she was for Bruce. Margot guessed that Bruce had probably slept with this woman, but what else was there? And how often? It was probably better to know for sure than to let your imagination run wild. "Tell me, be gentle." "All right," the woman said. "I warned you." The woman straightened up. Margot braced herself. "I'm an employee, and Bruce was my client. My husband did not go to the workers. Generally speaking, no. But I had it." "I don't believe you." "That's fine. No problem at all." The woman turned to leave. Margot was beside herself. Why would he go to the employee? She exclaimed. "Listen, Margot. May I call you Margot? What should I call you?" "You can call me Faya." "Is that your professional name?" "That's the name Bruce knew me by." Faya looked at the tombstone with a thoughtful expression on her face. "He never found out my real name." Margot stared at the woman, trying to figure out what kind of illicit relationship it could be. There was clearly more to it than money, despite what Faya had said, unless prostitutes had made a habit of visiting their clients' graves. "How did you find him?" Margot asked. "I haven't seen him in months," Faya said. "It was normal. Then one evening I got bored and Googled him. That's when I came across the obituary. It's a misfortune. He was a special person." "Why was he special to you?" "Oh, it's a long story." Fai seemed to have an idea. She looked at Margot, assessing her. "I charge 300 an hour, if you're interested in hearing more." "I'm not going to pay you for the story. I can do something nice." Don't you think I have a right to know? To be honest, no. Faya gave her a charming smile. I'm going to have lunch at that little tea shop I saw on the way, and if I don't see you again, I wish you a pleasant life. Faya started down the path. She had a light, swaggering gait that irritated Margot endlessly. Margot had always thought that she and Bruce had an exceptionally good life, and the thought that he might not have felt the same was a terrible blow. But what could be missing? Margot was ready for anything. Bruce always said how lucky he was to be married to such an enterprising woman. Okay, Faya was younger, but that couldn't be the reason, right? Margot walked over to Bruce's tombstone. In her head, the inscription now read, "A treacherous bastard and a lying deceiver." What the fuck, Bruce? She shouted at the granite rectangle. Damn it, what the hell is really going on? Faya was sitting at a small round table covered with a white lace tablecloth and looking out the window framed by frilly flowered curtains. She had just finished a surprisingly delicious Caesar salad and was wiping the corner of her mouth with a napkin when buxom Margot burst into the tiny establishment. The bell above the store's door rang like an alarm, but Faya smiled and beckoned her over. Margot walked past the other customers to a table by the window, her face darkening. "Please have a seat," Faya said, pointing to an empty chair. Margot plopped down on a chair, placing her bag on her lap. She looked furious. "I suppose you need cash?" "What is it?" she asked angrily. "I'm afraid so. My purse is a little small for a credit card machine." Margot handed the rolled-up fresh banknotes from the ATM across the table. Faya took the money and put it in her purse without checking it. The waitress, an elderly woman and the owner of the tea shop, came over to clear the dishes. Faya gave her a dazzling smile and ordered tea for two. Watching her, Margot clearly felt that Faye was enjoying herself. "So," Faya said when the waitress left, "where would you like to start? How did you first meet Bruce?" "I used to work at the gentlemen's club. There was a bar and a small dance floor, as well as separate rooms that could be rented for an hour. Me and the other girls chatted with the men, persuaded them to buy us drinks and, if they were in the mood, took them upstairs for special services." "It sounds charming." With a grin. "That's not the word I would use. But the club was clean, shiny, and very expensive. I earned well." The waitress came over with a tray with a full tea set on it. There was a small round teapot with matching cups and saucers, as well as a matching milk jug and sugar bowl. There were 4 chocolates on a tiny matching mini saucer. Faya looked at the ensemble and beamed with one of her dazzling smiles. "That's what I call charm." The waitress smiled as she put the tea things on the table. "You have a great place," Faya said, "and the salad was excellent." "Well, thank you." The elderly woman turned pink, almost curtsied and left. Faya poured 2 cups of tea while Margot watched from under half-closed eyelids. "Speaking of charm," she said, "you're pretty good at showing it." "Thank you, Margot. Was it part of the club training?" "In a way," Faya replied coldly. "Part of my job is to make men feel good. It's like the opposite of being a wife." Margot bristled. "I was kind to Bruce." "Really? What does this mean?" "Listen, Margot," Faya said. "Whenever I asked your husband why he married you, he always talked about how beautiful you were and how wonderful love was. It was very important to him how wonderful love was. And yet he paid for love with you? Not really." Faya sighed and took a sip of tea, lifting her little finger. "Look, technically, yes. He signed me up for 2 hours. We undressed and made love. But it was mostly at my insistence. I don't like taking money from a man and then not fulfilling my part of the deal. And of those 2 hours, maybe 10 to 15 minutes were spent on lovemaking. We mostly lay with each other and talked. About what? About you. About business. About how difficult it was for him to be a man. Never to show weakness, never to show fear. Always to give the impression that he was on top. But he's always been like that." Margot protested. "He was just such a person." "Margot, do you really believe that there is such a thing as such a person? Only a psychopath is never afraid of anything." "I'm sure of him." "Well, Bruce didn't think that was the case. He understood that if he ever told you the truth about his fears and insecurities, you would lose your desire and leave him for another man." "Why would he think that?" "Because that's what you did to your first husband." Margot turned pale. My God. How many secrets, personal details did Bruce share with this woman? A cup of tea stood in front of her, untouched, cooling down. Look, I'm not saying this to judge you, Faya said. I'm just saying that Bruce saw how you treated your first husband, so he was determined not to repeat the same mistakes. Once he even said, when Margot talks about her ex, it's like she's giving me a plan for what not to do. You shouldn't talk about what's bothering you, don't share how you really feel about something, and absolutely don't talk about thoughts that might include cutting costs. Problems with making money, because that's what your first husband did. And Bruce told me that you never stopped admiring what a relief it was for you to be with a real man who didn't post that. It's not fair, she said. You can't compare these two men. Bruce was a real man, while look, Jim is a good man, but he doesn't know how to be a man. He just wasn't right for a husband. Yes, Bruce knew that's how you see it, Faya said, that you don't need him the way he is. You wanted a fearless husband. It's not true. I've told Bruce many times that I want him to be himself more than anything in the world. Yes, but you said the same thing to your first husband. And when he took your word for it and opened up, you said he wasn't man enough and dumped him. So, when did you tell Bruce, I want you to be yourself? He understood it this way. I want you to be the kind of husband I want you to be. That's a lie. His tombstone says, fearless husband. What other evidence do you need? Margot jumped to her feet, banging on the table and almost knocking over the cups. She was pale, her nostrils flared, and she was staring intently at the other woman. But even when she was overcome with rage, when she spoke, there was desperation in her voice. You didn't know Bruce. You didn't know Bruce. No, you didn't know Bruce, Faya said calmly. And you weren't interested in meeting him. What you wanted was a perfect marriage. And if Bruce hadn't provided it for you, you would have left him for a man who would have done it. What do you know about marriage? You are a fool. Faya jumped to her feet. No, you're a fool. Stop it, she screamed. It was you who cheated on your first husband and then forced both men to lie about it to the child. You took a small child from his father when Bruce moved in with you, and then you filed a false child abuse report to get rid of your ex. Margot's eyes bulged in horror. Yes, he told me about it, Faya said fiercely. It was the first time we met. Bruce showed up at the club drunk, broken, and prone to self-destruction. Why should I believe that? I don't care if you believe it or not, but my own parents are divorced. So when I heard that there were 3 children in the emotional cesspool that you created, I thought I should at least try to help save the marriage. Faya grabbed her coat, put it on, and took her purse. The waitress came up and stood nervously nearby, clearly wanting to intervene in the altercation, but not quite understanding how to do it. Faya gave her an apologetic look and put $50 on the table, almost twice what was due. Then, frowning, she took out the remaining banknotes and threw them on the side of Margot's desk. Here, Faya said, your payment. Faya turned and walked away. The bell on the door rang when it was opened, and after it closed, there was an awkward silence. Margot hadn't visited Bruce's grave in over a week. When she finally forced herself to go, she was surprised at how simple the tombstone looked: gray, nameless, nothing special. The phrase, fearless husband, now seemed like a bad joke, and a streak of white-bird grain ran through his surname. Margot had a pack of baby wipes in her bag just in case, but this time she didn't bother. Let the rain wash it away. She left the churchyard and walked through the city, trying to cope with her emotions. She was very, very angry, and as she walked through the market square, she realized that the reason for her anger was that she felt like a loser. She married Jim, thinking he was a real man, only to find out that there was nothing extraordinary about him. Then she met Bruce, went and did exactly the same thing. Margot recalled how Bruce's company had been under investigation by the anti-fraud department a few years earlier. It turned out that this was the result of malicious rumors spread by a competitor, and Bruce sued their collective ass. But while this was going on, it was causing serious concern, since even the possibility of a scandal could ruin them. Ray, Bruce's partner, had lost a lot of weight and looked like a warmed-up death, with circles under his eyes and prematurely graying hair. While Bruce, although worried, maintained his confident demeanor, his positive attitude, and continued to pay a lot of attention to his wife. In a world full of scary people like Ray and Jim, Margot felt happy around a real man like Bruce. But now it turned out that Bruce was no different, that he, like Ray, was afraid of financial ruin and, like Jim, was afraid of losing his children. The only difference was that Bruce managed to hide it. And Margot now remembered how many evening meetings Bruce had at that time. Sometimes even on weekends. She felt cheated. Instead of dealing with his fears like a man, he ran to this pint-sized little fool. Margot realized that it wasn't the mental image of Bruce using the Fae that bothered her so much, would at least show some masculinity. No, it was the image of Bruce curled up on the bed, resting his head on the girl's lap, sobbing in fear while she stroked his hair and said, "Well, well, well, everything will be fine." Margot returned home and immediately went upstairs to the bedroom. She started taking Bruce's clothes out of the closet and throwing them on the bed. She has not yet decided whether to sell or give to charity shops, but now she will roll everything up and put it in an empty room. When the kids get home, they might be able to browse, just in case they want something to remember them by. It took Margot less than an hour to move her late husband's belongings from her living room to the spare room. Then she made herself a cup of tea and turned on the computer. A friend sent links to a couple of dating sites designed for Margot's age group, plus another one for dating potential cougars and toy boys. Margot decided to create a profile for all the sites. She was an attractive woman in her 40s and thought she could count on a decent acquaintance. Besides, she had to give herself a chance to be with a real man for a change. Well, there must be some, right?